Hi guys, welcome back. So today we are going to start our journey through the most influential women in jazz, and we are going to begin with Bessie Smith, who was one of the most famous blues singers of all time. And I know that you're probably sitting there thinking, you just said that you're doing a jazz channel. Why are you starting with a blues singer? And the short answer is that you cannot talk about jazz without first talking about the blues. And in fact, you really can't talk about any female jazz singer without first talking about Bessie Smith. But before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about Bessie's backstory. So Bessie Smith was born in Chattanooga, Tennessee on April 15th, 1894. She was born into poverty, but her luck began to change in 1912. One of the most famous blues singers of that time, Ma Rainey, came through her town and heard Bessie singing on a street corner and decided that she had to bring this girl into her act. And so between 1912 and 1915, Ma Rainey was Bessie Smith's primary vocal teacher. But quickly we can see that Bessie Smith began to surpass her teacher. Bessie had a melodic inventiveness and an impressive amount of pitch control, such that by the time she was about 21 years old, she decided to set out on her own. And so in 1915, she decided to have more of a solo career. She was performing mostly in small theaters. Until 1923, when she was signed to Columbia Records. The first song that she actually sang with Columbia Records and recorded with Columbia Records was a song called Downhearted Blues, and that single ended up skyrocketing her career. She became the highest paid black entertainer in the nation at the time, and she was in fact earning about $2,000 a week, which was almost unheard of in that time. But as we know from celebrities today, there is a lifestyle that a lot of them tend to fall into, and Bessie Smith was unfortunately no exception. She was a heavy drinker since she was a teenager, and by the time she rose to fame, it was just getting worse. And so she would fall into a habit of drinking before shows. She would drink tumblers of gin before a show, and sometimes she wouldn't show up, which started to lead people to not want to book her anymore because they knew that she wasn't reliable. This lifestyle really caught up to her in 1936 when she was in a car accident. She was 43 years old and ended up not making it to the hospital in time. She died of her injuries and was buried in an unmarked grave, which wasn't a problem that wasn't rectified until 1970, when a group of artists, including Janis Joplin, decided to pay for her headstone. So now that we've talked a little bit about her life and her career, let's go into what makes Bessie Smith so important to jazz and to the blues. And what really sets Bessie Smith apart from so many of the other blues artists of her time is that she acted as a bridge between the two genres. In a very basic sense, we can talk about the difference between the blues and jazz in that the blues has more to do with emotion. It's pretty much musically pared down, usually just a couple of instruments and a voice, and the singer will sing about life. Every emotion that has to do with life, but in particular, harsher realities of life, more painful parts of life. Whereas jazz has more of its emphasis on musical technicalities and elaborate lines and a lot of instrumentation. And so there feels like there's a very large distinction between the two genres, and there was until Bessie Smith came along. At the beginning of her career and throughout her career, really, she really tended towards emotional directness in her singing. She wasn't really interested in making her musical style anything really extra special in the way that we think about musicality these days. What was extra special about her singing was the emotion behind it. The fact that she would open up inside of her audience these emotions that they didn't know that they were feeling until she started singing. And that's everything that she wanted to do. But as time went on, she started to take a very different direction of the blues. As I said before, the blues likes to talk about love a lot, and usually the painful side of love, and sometimes the happy parts of love. But Bessie Smith decided that she wanted to talk about the other part of love that no one had talked about in the blues before. She wanted to talk about the physical side of love, and ended up singing a lot of songs that had quite a bit of sexual double entendre in them. And while this didn't do very good things for the way that people viewed her, she ended up being condemned mostly for being so scandalous and so bawdy to be a woman on stage singing about sex. So while that didn't really help her in that sense, she really helped the blues because she started to lighten the tone of the blues. She added humor to the blues, which is not something that a lot of people had tried to do before. Maybe no one had tried to do that before her. And so that really took the tone of the blues and turned it into something that we associate more with jazz. We think of jazz as being freer, a little bit more careless, and that's exactly what she was starting to do. Another really important thing that we can see about Bessie Smith is that her career was, in a way, a sort of metaphor for the way that jazz rose from the blues. So, as we said before, Bessie Smith started on street corners. She was singing on street corners. She just sang for the love of singing. And that's sort of the way that the blues had been before and still is even now. It's more of a community-based kind of music. You play it with your family in an intimate setting or in a smaller local cafe or theater. And that's the way that it always had been. And that's where Bessie started. But where she ended was in concert halls, which is sort of where we think of going to see a jazz performance even today. A more formal setting to hear more formal music. And it's sort of incredible that those two genres, those two lives, live in the life of one woman. And in a lot of ways, she's the one who made it possible for a lot of our future jazz singers to have that life. And unfortunately, that life did not treat her very well. As we saw before, she lived a very short life. She lived a life of poverty. She started in poverty. She ended in poverty because she had gained so much fame and so much money, but didn't really spend it well, spend it wisely. And by the time she died, she was basically in poverty again. But the one thing that we can see is that the blues made her life, whatever it was, it made her life great, and she in turn made the blues great, and she in turn made jazz possible, and we can always have her to thank for that. So thank you for sitting down and joining me. I will see you next time. Bye.